And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Clancy.
My name is Clancy Imislund, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm very glad to be here this evening. Glad to be part of this group again, and I've been here a number of times. Travers over there in the end brought me over here the first time in 1988 for the first one of these affairs. Last night I was in Belfast, and I remember Travers and I stopped in Belfast on the way here, and they were very touching. In the middle of all the troubles, the meeting was going on, and in the distance you could hear explosions, boom, boom, and once in a while gunfire. At the end of the meeting, the leader got up and said, "This is a historic moment," he said. "You are in the only room in North Ireland where Catholics and Protestants are sitting in peace." It brought a tear to my eye, actually, very nice. I have very much enjoyed the 10-minute speakers. I hate to say this, but John lived in Los Angeles with us for a while, as he mentioned, and I took him under my wing as best I could. But tonight, I wish it would have been Judy instead of John. I'm in a position today that's a little odd. I still chase girls, but I can't remember why. You may think that's funny, but it isn't. I may have mentioned this before. I had a pretty good trip here, all in all. I'll tell you a bad trip. A few years ago, I went to Iceland, to Reykjavik to talk. That's beyond any length, I'll tell you, from Los Angeles. And I went there, and on the way home, I was very tired. It was Sunday night, and I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is in the middle of the United States. Had to wait 4 hours for a plane, and I was so tired. And I sat in the red carpet room, which was the United Airlines frequent flyer room, and eventually I had to go to the bathroom. So I went to the bathroom. They had two little stalls side by side, and I sat in one and thought about things. And all of a sudden, a voice comes from the other side and says, "Hi there." You can't be talking to me. So I ignored it. Pretty soon the voice said, "What are you doing tonight?" I thought I'd better quash this right away. I'm going back to Los Angeles to see my wife and my children and my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, but thank you very much for asking. There was a long pause. The voice said, "We could really have some fun tonight if you wanted to." And I was tired, and I didn't act like a good A. I said, "Why don't you just shut up over there? I don't want to hear that crap." There was a long pause, and the voice said, "I'll have to call you back. This jerk in the next stall won't shut up." That's a bad trip. Well, I have been asked to come here and tomorrow night tell my dreary story, and tonight talk about the state of AA, whatever that might be. And I'm glad to do that because I think we're approaching some milestones in Alcoholics Anonymous. Ever since a little before the International Convention in the year 2010, the 75th anniversary, there's been sort of a little movement in some parts of AA to change certain things. One of the changes that a great many people seem to want to have is to relax our demand that people be alcoholics to be members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the theory is that there's so many young people now coming in who are drug addicts or have primarily drug addicts, and we have so many other problems that we really should be in a position to help these people instead of turning them away. And the second thing they want us to do, another group of people, and it sounds reasonable, to change the big book. Not so much but to put it more in modern terms. They said it's written in 1930s style. it doesn't have enough up-to-date illusion. And the third one, of course, is to, you don't have this problem here, I don't think, but we have a problem in the States where we say the Lord's Prayer at the end of the meeting to get rid of the Lord's Prayer. And another group of people want to get rid of anonymity. They say we don't need anonymity anymore, it just confuses people. We don't have to be ashamed of being alcoholics anymore. And they all sound very good. They have very good approaches to them. And I want to discuss them just a little bit tonight as kind of a where do we go from here. That first one, it does seem, why would you have to be an alcoholic now, these days, when theory is completely different? And then you have to a little bit go back to understand what's the nature of Alcoholics Anonymous. Remember Bill Wilson, who had his spiritual experience and came out of there just full of zeal to help people, and he went to the Oxford group, and for 6 months he took people to the Oxford group, pick up street drunks, The Oxford group was primarily a group of, in every city, well-to-do people who met in one another's homes, and very nice. And Bill would pick up these stinking street drunks and bring them to the meeting, and they... I believe you're vomiting on my shoes, sir. And sometimes he'd bring them home, and he'd fill them full of zeal, the need for the higher power. And after 6 months, he got up one morning at home, and he noticed the guy he'd brought home the night before. He used to bring home guys, too, if they had no place to go. The guy he brought home the night before was gone, and so was the coffee pot. Apparently, he'd taken the coffee pot to sell for wine or something. And he looked at his wife, who, when he had married her, had been a pert little society girl, and now old before her time, salt and pepper hair, wearing an old dull dress, putting on her sweater with a patch on the sleeve so she could go work in a cheap apartment store so she could have enough money to pay the rent so he could go to the Oxford group. And he had a terrible wave of remorse. He said, I'm so sorry, Lois. I thought I had some sort of calling to help people, but apparently I don't. Not one person has stayed sober, and I'm done trying to do this. And right there, I'll tell you something. Your life and mine hung by a thin thread as it will ever hang. And he said, I'm going to get a job if it's just shoveling dirt, but I'm going to make it okay for you to stay home, honey. I'm so sorry that I've done this to you over the years. And she turned to him and said something that changed the course of history. I was having lunch with her about 35 years ago in Connecticut. I said, Lois, how did you ever think of that answer? What a great answer. It saved us all our bacon, saved our bacon. She said, I don't know, it just seemed obvious. He said, not one person has stayed sober with me trying to help him. And she said, you did. He said, oh, yeah. That's why old-timers don't have much hair in front. You just go through life going, oh, yeah, oh, yeah. So he decided to try it again, but he knew he was doing something wrong. He didn't know what it was. So we went down to Towns Hospital. His old friend, Dr. Silkworth, the last time he was in there as a drunk, had called his wife and said, he's going to die. He can't do this again. But now he was sober, so he went down to see him. He said, what am I doing wrong, Doc? I try to take these people in the Oxford group and teach them about the higher power, and they get drunker. Nothing helps. And the doctor said, well, frankly, Bill, I think you're doing it wrong. He said, I never saw a drunk who got sober from God. He said, when you start preaching to them, they just turn you off. He said, I think what you got to tell them is something different. What you got to tell them is that you know how they feel. And you know what drinking does for them, and you explain what it did for you. He says, I can't tell them this because I don't know. But alcoholics seem to have an invisible wall around them, and always have had. And good advice just bounces off it. Everybody, I would say that's certainly true, everybody in this room has had enough advice to last them 5,000 years. Just, here's what I think you ought to do. Is that what you think? And he said, somehow, I think if you get through to them that maybe you understand how they feel, it may get rid of that wall. He said, well, I don't think so, Doc, but I'll try it. And he got home that night and he found a letter. He'd been offered a job. First job he'd been offered since he'd been sober. And some people had been watching him and they said, Bill, you've been sober 6 months now. I think you're ready for a little deal. We got a deal. We're putting together a machine tool company out in Akron, Ohio. And I want you to go out there. Your son is leaving. Nice to see you, Simeon. See you down at rehab. Anyway. Yeah. I think he's just going out to go to Vespers. But they said, Bill, I want you to go out there and pick up these proxies. And once you get this company going, you're going to be president and you're going to be on Easy Street. Great. So he went out to Akron, as we all know that story. And the deal blew up in his face. And he found himself on a Saturday morning, hot Saturday morning in May, standing in a hotel lobby. He looked in his pocket, he had a $10 bill. He had his choice if he could either pay his hotel room or take a train back to New York. And he didn't want to do either one because he was a failure. If he went back to New York, they all told him, you know, if you don't bring this deal off, you'll never work around here again. And he didn't want to go back there and explain to his wife how he'd failed again. And he was standing in the lobby of something called the Mayflower Hotel in Akron, Ohio. I stood in that very same spot 7 years later trying to recreate how we felt. I obviously couldn't do it, but I tried. I'm a romanticist. And he mentioned in his story that over there was a door and with an orange sign over it, neon sign that said cocktails. And he heard the music coming out of there and some laughter. And he had a feeling that I'm sure everybody in this room might have. If I just had a couple of drinks, I could think of the answer. Just a couple of drinks. And he started to go, and our lives diminished with each step. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw some telephones over at the phone booth, and he went over. Then he remembered he'd promised his friends in the Oxford group he had called somebody in the Oxford group before he got sober, before he got drunk. So we went over there to the phone, and in small towns in in America at that time, over the phones they'd have the list of the leading churches in town with the minister and the phone number. So he called the first one. He said, my name is Bill Wilson, I'm a drumhound from New York, and I need to talk to somebody in the Oxford group. And the man said, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm trying to write a sermon. Please don't bother me. Hung up. Next one he called, didn't answer. Next one he called, didn't answer. Next one he called, said, I'd like to help you, but I don't know what you're talking about. And I don't know about you, but I presume me in that situation would say, well, I did what I said I would. I'll just have a couple. As he turned away, he noticed the bottom name had a funny name. He thought it was a funny name, Walter Tunk. Maybe I should call Walter Tunk just to get rejected one more time. So he called Walter Tunk. And Walter Tunk turned out to be the only guy in Akron that could have helped him. He said, funny you should call. I have a very wealthy parishioner who's a member of the Oxford group. She is. And she was telling me just yesterday that her doctor is a member of the Oxford group as well, but admitted this week's meeting that he was a drunkard and he couldn't stop himself. And everybody's very concerned about him. Maybe I can put you in touch with her and you can maybe talk to this drunken doctor. He said, okay, I'll wait here in the phone booth. So the minister called the parishioner and explained what was going on. The parishioner, yes, I think I'll try to get him with the doctor. I'll call you back, Reverend. And she called the doctor's house, and the phone rang, and rang and rang and rang, just hanging up. When if you heard say, hello, he said, I'm sorry, I was out in the yard. I just ran as fast as I could. What can I do for you? And she explained this to the woman. The woman said, well, that's wonderful to hear that, but we can't go anywhere to talk to him today because the doctor's drunk on the floor and can't get up. He brought me some potted flowers for Mother's Day, but he was potted too. So, and she said, we could do it tomorrow. She said, okay, well, come to my house in West Akron. Come to my big place. And let's say at 4 o'clock, we'll have a bite to eat, and maybe the two can talk. So she called back the minister, and the minister called back Bill, waiting in the phone booth. And I'll tell you, he'd been waiting a while, and he was about ready to cut out right then. Well, this is another wild goose chase. But okay, he said, here's what you do. You take a streetcar and you go out to her house. And so the next day, which was Mother's Day, more papers keep falling off this damn podium. Mother's Day of 1935, he went out there in the streetcar to her house, and this doctor came out with he was so hungover and so sick he couldn't drive. He had his son drive, 16-year-old son, who later became a good member of Al-Anon many years later. He kept marrying alcoholics like a dummy, and was a good guy, a good friend of mine, young Bob, they called him. He's been dead now for some time. But he used to talk about driving out there, what it was like. His father and the mother sat in the back, and his sister and he sat in the front seat. And all the way out there, his father was saying, Ann, I'll talk to this man because I've ruined Mother's Day, but I'll give him 10 minutes. No more. I'll give him 10 minutes because this is my makeup to you for spoiling Mother's Day. But I'm so sick of lectures about my drinking, I'm not going to talk to him any longer than that. And they went out there and had a bite to eat, and these two guys went in the room and stayed there 4.5 hours. And he came out, the doctor, and he said, Ann, he said, my God, that's the first man I ever talked to who seemed to know how I feel and why I drink and what drinking does for me. He said, my God. He said, Bill, could you contemplate staying with us just maybe a couple of weeks and we could talk some more about how we do this? And Bill thought, let's see. I have no way to get out of town. Yes, I can. So he moved in with them, and they spent every day for a couple of weeks discussing spiritual values and how to get in closer touch with your God and how to find salvation through Jesus' grace. And the doctor just got feeling wonderful. And after 2 weeks, he said, Bill, I want you to stay with my family this weekend. I'm going to Atlantic City. They have the National American Medical Association meeting. And I was there last year, and I was so drunk they ridiculed me constantly. But I'll go this time, and I'll tell them about what I found and my new relationship with God, and they'll be surprised. And he said, I'll be back Tuesday morning. Well, Tuesday morning came, phone rang, Mrs. Smith answered, said, I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith, this is the doctor's office nurse. They carried the doctor off the train this morning so drunk he couldn't walk. And the station agent knows me, so I came down, and the taxi driver, I've taken him up to our office here, and he's laying on the floor crying, and I feel so sorry because I know he was trying hard. And Mrs. Smith said, okay, our friend Mr. Wilson and I will come down and pick him up. And they went out and got this drunken doctor. The worst type of drunk, crying drunks. God, they're dreadful. I'm so sorry. Boom! You know. And they took him home and put him to bed. That was the end of that big experiment. Even the baby cried back there. It was so sad. And Thursday morning, he sat up. He said, what day is it? He said, it's Thursday morning, Bob. He said, oh, my God. I've got to do a cancer surgery today. And look at my hand. I can't do a cancer surgery. My God, I can't hold a knife. I'll lose my license. So they got him up, and they bathed him and dressed him. His new friend Bill got him some beer to settle his hand down. And away he went to the hospital. So I'll be back about 2 o'clock. And 2 o'clock came, didn't come. 3 o'clock came, he didn't come. 4 o'clock came, he didn't come. 5 o'clock, the old son of a bitch is drunk again, apparently. And the door opened at 6 o'clock, and he came bursting in, cold sober. He said, "Boy, do I feel good." They said, "Where you been, Bob?" He said, "When I was doing that surgery, I was thinking, in the Oxford group, they're always talking about wanting us to make amends. And I never thought a doctor should have to make amends. But I realized I'm a human being first. And after that surgery, I've been making amends all over Louisville, all over Akron. And I feel wonderful." And that was June 10th, 1935. And AA considers that its birthday. We didn't know it was anybody's, they didn't know it was anybody's birthday, just drunk getting sober again another day. But it turned out neither one of them drank again, and gradually it evolved into the group it is now. But the point of it all was this. They realized sitting around talking about God and Jesus is not what kept Bill Wilson sober and didn't keep Dr. Bob sober. He stayed sober by trying to help people. So they realized they had to talk to somebody. At that time, you couldn't get in the hospital for alcoholism. You had to have some other disease to get you in, and gastritis was a big one. And so the doctor called his nurse that he knew up in the hospital, Sister Ignatia, and said, "Do you have anybody up there that's drunk, despite what they're in for?" She said, "Yes. We have Bill D. here for gastritis, but he's a drunk. That's what he's here for. So can we go and see him?" She said, "I'll talk to his wife. I'll let you know." I heard him talk many years ago, 40 years ago. And he said, "I was lying on that bed in Akron, Ohio. And my wife came in and said, 'There are two men who want to talk to you about your drinking.' And I said, 'Absolutely not. I've talked to all the people about my drinking I'm ever going to talk to. Don't ever even bring it up again. I'm not going to talk to anybody.' But my wife was a rather strong woman. So I talked to those two fellas. And they never talked about drinking at all. They talked about their drinking and how they felt and what it did for them. I never heard anybody describe me like that before. I'm so impressed I stuck with him. Fellas have been with him ever since. And he became alcoholic number 3 in the chain. And they had a hard time with people because they'd get drunks and get them sober. They'd take them to the Oxford group and somebody talk about Jesus for an hour and they'd go get drunk again. It's hard to do that. They finally got a little group of people they called the drunken wing, or the alcoholic wing of the Oxford group. They sat in one little section and tried not to listen, I guess. But they had a hard time. I just wanted, just in passing, this has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but it's a funny little thing. They got a young guy, 29 years old, who came to them for help. They said, "Well, you can't possibly be an alcoholic. You're only 29 years old. But you do drink a lot. Come on around with us. We talk to people, go to the Oxford group." So he did. And he fell in love with Dr. Bob's daughter, that young guy. And isn't that wonderful? He brought us our first relationship. I don't know any word that just sends a shiver down a sponsor's spine like that one. "I want to talk to you about my new relationship." What you want to have on your desk is a machine that says, "uh-huh, uh-huh." And they say wonderful things like, "Gee, Clancy, I thought Betty was the one, but God, when I saw Lois walking out of detox today, I just knew." Well, they got married. Now that sounds romantic, doesn't it? That happened in my family. My youngest daughter, Susan, who John knows, married a guy named Tom, who a guy sponsored 5 years sober. I was against the marriage, but I have a big family of daughters, and they all know how dumb Dad is. What does he know? So she got married, and I'll tell you the absolute epitome of mixed emotions. It's watching your daughter go down the aisle to marry a man whose fifth step you've heard. you can't really say anything, you know, but you can give hints. Let me know if he ever brings a sheep home. And they said, you don't have to go to the Oxford group meetings for a while. You stay home and be a good husband and take care. We'll take care of all this other calling on drunks and stuff. He said, okay. So he stayed home and became a good husband. And they didn't realize the nature of what they were dealing with. And so when he got drunk and died, they were upset by it. They didn't know. But he got drunk and turned her against AA for 50 years. But little by little they grew. But it always grew the same way, talking about emotions and drinking feelings and why you do it that got through that wall. And little by little, Alcoholics Anonymous was based entirely, because here's something to think about. There's nothing in AA or our literature that isn't found elsewhere. Over the years, there's all kinds of stuff been written about alcoholics. What makes AA work is getting this information through that wall. That's what makes it work. And so that's why when Bill Wilson some years later wrote the traditions, he specifically said we carry the message to the alcoholic who still suffers. Now, today, there's one of the problems, not a problem, but one of the movements in AA, they say, look, third tradition says the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. I've got a desire to stop drinking. I'm not an alcoholic, but I got a desire to stop drinking, so you can't keep me out of here. Which sounds realistic, doesn't it? But then you have to go back to the traditions as they were originally written and still are. In the back of the big book, across from the short form, there's the long form. And the third tradition reads something entirely different. It says, we want to help all those who suffer from alcoholism. And it was not designed for anybody who just came by. And people said, what? That shouldn't be. Why is that rule there anyway? It isn't a rule in the first place, but it's there because the one thing that makes AA workable is one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic. And that is why in the 1950s, there was a guy in Los Angeles, and he was an alcoholic and a gambler, and he got sober in AA. And he did so well, he started bringing his gambler buddies to the AA meetings. And they said, well, I don't want to hear this old junk about these guys, these drunken fools. I got nothing to do with them. So he said, I can understand this, no identification. So he wrote to New York and became the first person to get permission to use the 12 steps outside of AA. And he founded Gamblers Anonymous so that these people could go and hear the same information but identify with it to get through that wall. And then a couple years after that, a couple guys in North Hollywood were taking drug addicts to meetings, and they're not getting anything out of it. So they got permission to use the 12 steps to form Narcotics Anonymous. Then some people out in the area where I live, on the west side of Los Angeles, after that, a couple guys got together and they got permission to use the 12 steps for Cocaine Anonymous. And then a woman in the central Hollywood area got permission to start Overeaters Anonymous, all based on having a place to identify. I never really understood the difference until I was about 2 years sober. I remember I had lost my front teeth while I was drinking through no fault of my own. Some guy just decided to kick him out in the floor of the Phoenix jail. But but by the time I got to be 2 years sober, I'd been slipping for years, and now I was 2 years sober. God, I was put in things in. And I was talking at the club one day on obsessions, because I'm an authority on obsessions, not the recovery from them, but just the obsessions. And some kind of plump woman came up after her. She said, that's very interesting, she said. You know, I've started an organization over on Olympic Boulevard called Overeaters Anonymous. And I think a lot of our ladies would identify with what you're talking about. Would you come over and talk Sunday? I said, sure. I weighed about 125 pounds and had I'll give something to shoot for. And I went over there and I gave these women a pep talk on the obsessions, and they identified about 8 fat ladies sitting around a table. Then they had a little sharing session when I was done, and I couldn't believe my ears. A woman over here said her son just turned 9 years old, and he was in a military school in Long Beach. Her husband went down to get him, and she got everything ready. She took out the birthday cake, took a little piece and ate it. Ate another little piece. By the time they got back, she'd eaten the whole cake. And she felt so bad. Oh, she's just so terrible. And I didn't say anything because I'm a nice guy. But I felt like saying, Jesus, just have a piece of cake and forget it. What the hell's wrong with you, you know? Then a woman over here talked about how she loved ice cream. Oh, I can't wait for my husband to go to work in the morning. I go down to the store and get ice cream. I just love ice cream. It just makes me feel whole. I just don't know why. And it's just wonderful. And I didn't say anything because I'm a nice guy. But I wanted to say, no wonder you're fat, for Christ's sake. Woman over here, this is my favorite. She ate till she couldn't eat anymore. Then she put her finger down her throat and puked it up and ate some more. And I didn't say anything, but I wanted to say, don't bother shaking hands with me after the meeting. I can see doing that for drinking, but not eating. I've done it for drinking a lot. My God, Saturday afternoon, sun's still up. Now, what is the difference? I understood it intellectually. I got a good brain, but I didn't identify. So it just became odd behavior, which is the way all of us find out about it when we try to convince our folks what's wrong with us. You mean you can't even have a glass of wine at Christmas? They don't understand it, nor should they understand it. But identification is the hallmark of AA. Without that, it's just data. And that is why a great many of us feel that we should keep being what we have doing, which is alcoholics talking to alcoholic. Most of you have heard about the Washingtonians, which was a group of people very much like AA, and they got started in 1840, and they really took off. They had a lot of people. By 1845, they had thousands and thousands of people sober, just by talking to each other. And they made a plan. They thought, their leaders got together and said, we're so successful, we ought to be able to help a lot of people. We should help narcotics addicts who aren't alcoholics, not heroin and cocaine like today, but laudanum and opium, what they used then. We should get into politics. We should help people. We should do all these things. And they said, yeah, and they all got going full speed. And by 1848, the Washingtonians were extinct, and nearly all of them died on the street. Almost 100,000 members. I had a book home written in 1961, or 1861, by one of the survivors. He says, I don't know what happened. We were doing so well, but we seemed to get involved in so many things we didn't have time to talk to drunkards anymore, and we had, one by one, our members just left. And that was a great instruction to all of us, I think. We've been given a gift that no one else has, no minister, no doctor, no psychiatrist. We can, with the right words, get through that wall, and nobody else can. You know, an interesting thing, in 1963, I was sober 5 years, and they sent me to New York to do a project, project. And when I was there, I thought I'll go over and see Bill Wilson. I heard him talk at the convention in 1960, and I'll go over and see him. So I went to the World Service Office. I said, I'd like to see Bill Wilson. She said, oh, he has appointments every day full up for weeks in advance. I can get you in maybe in 3 weeks. I said, no, never mind. Sorry, I won't be here. So I went over to the archives and looked through old stuff, and pretty soon here comes Bill Wilson. He said, are you the young man who wanted to see me? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, come on in. My 11 o'clock didn't show up. So we sat down in his office and talked. And do you know what he said? Well, I can't remember. I thought you'd like to know anyway. But the one thing I do remember, I said, Bill, last month we were in our book study meeting, we were going through how to working with others. And you in there, you talk about how, all the things you say to them and how to treat them, but you never once talk about taking them to a meeting. don't you in New York people take people to meetings? He said, son, when I wrote that, there were no meetings, just the Oxford group. But just think about that, what a battle they had. And when they broke free from the Oxford group, AA started to grow. Nothing wrong with the Oxford group, but it was not designed to help drunkards. So it is the considered opinion of many people, myself included, that we keep our tradition of carrying the message to the alcoholic who still suffers, not someone who suffers from something else somewhere else. Not that they don't need help, but we have no magic tool for them. We just have a magic tool for alcoholics. That's what we have. So I guess hopefully don't change that. Then they want to change the book. Some people want to change the book. Make it more modern, make it more up to date, which sounds reasonable. Except when you think about it, that the book is not a novel, it's not an interesting thing. And most of us remember why it was written in 1938. Alcoholics Anonymous going forward, but they thought we must have a hospital where drunkards could go in as drunkards, because there's no place, they die on the street. But how can we have a hospital? We got to get some money. We're going to get some money. We'll write a book about what we're doing, and everyone will want to read it, and we'll make hundreds of thousands of dollars. We'll build a hospital. So Bill Wilson wrote this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. Very interesting. Kind of struggled with it, but tried to see what was successful in AA at that time. And they had it printed, sent a postcard to every doctor on the East Coast. Said, at least now you can treat your drunkards. There's a way to do it. And they know they just waited for the flood of postcards to come in. They got one response. That said no. And so much for that. Now we have a pile of books that they had to sell shares to. They called it Works Publishing. They sold poor innocent alcoholic shares in that. Nobody ever got any money out of it. You just paid for the books. But the book, later on, when the Saturday Evening Post article ran in 1941, at least they had a book to send out to people and explain what AA did. And it turns out that book is a remarkable object. You know, when I was new, I slipped in and out for 10 years. I had a terrible time with AA because I just felt that it has no application to my life. But I'd hear these old fools get up and say, that book is a miracle. And that's a word I always felt much overused in AA. Everything's a miracle, for Christ's sake. Tell me something that's not a miracle. Tell me something I can believe in. And they said, it's a miracle. Now, how could it be a miracle? Well, the guy that wrote it didn't know enough to write it. That's one thing. You know, it's an odd thing about that book. It gets smarter every year you're sober. It shapes up little by little. Now I think it's a miracle. But he wrote this stuff. Now, he was 3 years sober, had no background in psychology or abnormal psychology or medicine or most of the people around him were getting drunk. He put those stories in the back of the book to fill it out so they could sell it for a little bit more. And most of those guys drank again. You know, it's hard to stay sober. But he was 3 years sober and he wrote this book. Now, sometimes new people might say, there was a couple of new people here tonight think, God, you should know enough to write a book by the time you're 3 years sober. That's a long time. But you'll discover you don't. You don't know enough. People 3 years sober, you just, by the time you're 5 years sober, you just try to be nice to people 3 years sober. Hang in there, Jimmy, you're doing a good job. By the time you're 10 years sober, you hate to send people 3 years sober to get your coffee. Was that 2 creams and 1 sugar or 2 sugars and 1 cream? I'll get it myself. Forget it. By the time you're 20 years sober, you hate to have people 3 years sober unattended on your property. I want to keep an eye on them. They might. And yet this guy, 3 years sober, wrote this book and got very little acceptance of it. And what's good about that book? It has changed more alcoholics' lives of our type in the last 72 years than all other therapies combined in the history of mankind. That is a miracle. And it deals primarily with talking about how we feel. No lectures on being better. In fact, one of the great things in that book, one of the great hallmarks of the Oxford group, they had the 4 absolutes. We insist on absolute honesty, absolute various things, beliefs, absolutely. And that turned out to be, Bill Wilson was smart enough to see that is not good for people like us. Because let me tell you something funny. In the 1950s, Yale University in America ran the first big study of alcoholics ever made. They had people in there and they were giving them drinks and giving non-alcoholics drinks and see how they responded. And they filled out forms and they just did everything you could think of to do. At the end, they had a report about this thick. But when you got to the bottom of it, there were really only 2 things that all alcoholics had in common. They all were perfectionists, was one of those things. And we all know that feeling. I want things to be just right, and I'm going to make them right, and if I can't, screw it. And Bill Wilson knew that we aim for perfection and never make it. And one of the great paragraphs of that book is a paragraph following the 12 steps. It said, put in order, many of us exclaimed, put in order, I can't go through that. Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. We claim spiritual progress, not spiritual perfection. I heard another guy put it in a different way. So true. He said, like on January or December 31st, we all go to bed and make our resolutions. I'm not going to swear anymore. I'm going to meetings, be nice to all newcomers, hold my job. Sometimes you last 4 or 5 days before you break them, And you think, God damn it, I have to wait till next January. But in AA, every night is New Year's Eve. Every morning is New Year's morning. Fail today, make your resolutions, do it tomorrow. What a great place that we can do that. And all of us fail a lot. None of us ever rise above human being. And human beings are full of faults and emotions and childish attitudes sometimes. And that's one of the sad things about alcoholics, because of a number of reasons. But we wind up grown-up bodies, grown-up brains, grown-up abilities, grown-up strengths, and all at the intermittent beck and call of childish emotions. And it's just dreadful. But there's ways to overcome that too. But this book is, but the idea of changing the book is that the book in itself is remarkable. I always thought another one of the reasons it's a miracle I've come to believe is when they talk about the 9th step and they give the 12 promises. If you are thorough at this stage of your development, these things will happen. And every self-help group in the world gives you things that are going to happen. You're going to be rich and famous and happy, and ha ha ha. None of it ever happens, ever. But in the big book, those 12 things, the first time you read them, they seem silly. But you stay here long enough, and they all come true. They hadn't come true to Bill Wilson when he wrote them. That's what makes it so remarkable. He just got some inspiration somewhere. Somebody guided his hand, because he hadn't, none fear of financial insecurity hadn't left him. He didn't get along with people. He had a terrible time. Yet all of these things have happened to all sorts of people today. They don't stay because we screw them up, but they come back again and again. I've had the 12 promises come true in my life several times, and shortly thereafter I screwed them up. But that's being a part of being a human being. So I think a book that has changed more lives, it's not supposed to be a current hip thing. It's a It's an emotion. It's dealing with emotions and feelings like nothing else we've ever read. And that's why a great many people believe, yeah, we like this book. If you have a way to do it better, show us. Write your book and let's see what happens. Show us your version of it and show the people getting well from it. Here we can show you thousands of groups like this all over the world who are getting well from the one we got. And so I guess we old-fashioned folks would like to believe that we like this book and we don't want to change it. In America, there's a kind of a, it isn't very obvious yet, but there's a little bit of a movement to get God out of AA. In fact, one of the pamphlets they're working on in New York is a pamphlet for the atheists. And it sends a shiver down your spine because it seems that a higher power is essential. It's essential that we have some place to subordinate our own egos and wills. And as I say in America, they say, let's get rid of the Lord. Some of the people say, get rid of the Lord's Prayer. It offends our Jewish members, for example. They say that a lot. Now, my home group, the Pacific Group, is the largest group in the world. 950 people meet every Wednesday night in a big synagogue. Some of you have been there. And sometimes the rabbi comes in, sits in the back row, and wonders how he can get that many people into his service on Friday night. But I always notice when we say the Lord's Prayer, he jumps up and holds hands. It doesn't offend him to say the Lord's Prayer. There's nothing in the Lord's Prayer that is not in the 12 steps. I mean, it's such a stupid thing to argue about. Well, it came from Jesus. He's a Christian. Christian prayer. Well, when he issued it, he was not a Christian. He was a rabbi. But it's just always some niggling crap like that. And I hope they say, well, the Serenity Prayers. I don't know if you ever, the Serenity Prayer comes from someone who worked as a theologian. Niebuhr, his name was. And he was a active theologian. He was really a Christian. And in the Serenity Prayer, we've taken that a little bit out of the Serenity Prayer. There's another part to it where it talks about having faith that Jesus will make it all right and Jesus will take care of us. That is really a religious prayer. But it doesn't mention Jesus in that little phrase, so they say, well, this is not a Christian prayer, this is just a general prayer. The Serenity Prayer is a Christian prayer more than the Lord's Prayer is. But I love the Serenity Prayer and I love the Lord's Prayer. Because what is offensive, I think what's offensive in the Lord's Prayer? Ask God to remove our defects, so we do in AA and so on. It's a very odd thing. But that's a matter of taste. I guess if people want to fight the Lord's Prayer, they can. But I hope we don't fight to get rid of the idea of a power greater than ourselves. Because it's true that when the Oxford group, that kept a lot of people out of staying sober, because that's all they had to offer them was, find God and you'll be all right. No. But we don't say that. We say find someone, a power you can believe in. When I was new, I was such a mixed up, crazy bastard, I could not find a God. And my sponsor became my higher power, and as a result of that, I survived and lived. And a lot of people find a higher power that's not some old guy in the sky with a long beard. But that's the whole beauty of Alcoholics Anonymous. We are given our choice to what to surrender, but then we got to surrender. And the last thing I know about that they're fighting about is anonymity. There's been a couple articles written in the New York Times, long articles saying AA has to get rid of anonymity by members. You know, at one time we needed to surrender, but we have to protect ourselves. But we don't have to be protected anymore. We need to maintain, we have to show people what we are. We're alcoholics, and we're proud of it. We're proud to be sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous. We don't want to be anonymous anymore. And they completely ignore the fact what that's about. It isn't to protect people. Maybe it was once upon a time in 1935, but it isn't now. It is our surrender of our ego to an overlapping force. Over the years, I've watched it. When I was new, at that time, it was kind of smart to break your anonymity. 1958, there was a woman named, can't remember her name, but she was a very famous singer, actress. What's your name, John? You remember? Huh? Huh? What's your name? What was it? Well,
The movie Don't Cry for Me.
yeah. No, that wasn't it either. It's close, John. Anyway, she wrote a book, and her sponsor said, don't put in there that you were in AA, because we don't do that. She said, oh, when they see that I'm in AA, people will want to come, just because screen scars come here. And a couple years later, when she lay drunk in the streets of Palm Springs, dying, vomiting up her life, I don't think it hurt AA at all, but it seemed to hurt her. Her name, I'll Cry Tomorrow, is the name of the book. Lillian Roth. I knew that. Where am I exactly now? Is this the airport? Lillian Roth, yeah. The next year, John Barrymore's daughter she wrote a book called Too Much Too Soon. And she talked about how AA had helped her. So much so, she was able now to have wine with dinner. And that created a stir, I'll tell you. So when she died in the Malibu drunk tank, people weren't surprised at all. But over the years, I've never seen anyone break their anonymity that has profited from it. Now, I don't believe that God's sitting up there saying, you broke your anonymity, I'm going to punish you. He doesn't care. But something in the ego. When I put myself above Alcoholics Anonymous, I think I'm helping them now by letting them know that I'm there. I'm above the tent of it's very fine till the cold wind blows and there's no place to turn. And then a lot of those people get drunk and have no place to go, and they think AA let them down. But the whole purpose of anonymity, it seems to me, is to surrender your ego. Sometimes there's a little question about what anonymity consists of. Because of the nature of my work in Los Angeles, I've been on television a lot, interviewed on television. And there was an 8-page article in the Reader's Digest about me when I left a job in Beverly Hills to go run a place on Skid Row. And I've been on a lot of radio programs. But anonymity consists of, you must never give your last name as a member of AA. If you give your last name, then you can't mention AA. It used to be kind of funny. 50 years ago, it was kind of becoming in now to discuss alcoholism. They'd get us to come over and sit and talk in radio stations. And remember when this guy was saying to me, he said, they'd give you names. My name was Alcoholic Al. He said, Al, you say that you actually tried to commit suicide and died and had to be brought back to life? I said, yes. I wasn't surprised. I just said it. And he had big tears in his eyes. I said, Al, you're the first person I've ever talked to that really thought about killing themselves. And I'd been in AA too long by then. I said, God, you're the first person I ever met who didn't. You know, everybody I know did. But anonymity, you can't show your face as a member of AA. You can't. In year 2000, A&E Network in America did a 1-hour special on AA, and they had 4 people talk, one from the south, west, north, and east. I was the one from the west. And they put us behind a screen, and we couldn't use our right names. But they asked us questions about AA, and we could talk about it as long as we didn't identify ourselves, or no one could identify us. Once you could be identified, you're no longer a member of AA. You can't ever say you're a member of AA. That's what breaking anonymity. Anonymity is not using AA for your own purposes. That's what anonymity is. It's a spiritual condition. And these people writing these letters, of course, they're doing it they're writing it for one purpose, for their betterment. So I guess that it is my belief that we don't change it. I don't want to be the one who, I don't want to be the next Lillian Roth or the next Diana Barrymore or any of those other people I've watched over the years. AA is just a kind of a wonderful thing the way it is. And people say it could be improved in many ways. But I always want to say, show me, don't tell me, show me how it can be improved. Show me in your group, show me what you're doing that's working better than what we're doing. And in our, as I say, in my home group in Los Angeles, where there's almost 1,000 people every week sitting in the synagogue, we are very pleased with AA the way it is. So I guess what I'm trying to say tonight is, where do we go from here? I hope we don't go anywhere. I hope we stay right where we are. I hope that we will always welcome people who are alcoholics, not people who are, when they condensed that thing to the only requirement for membership was the desire to stop drinking, nobody ever dreamed that someday non-alcoholics would try to sneak into AA. We can't get alcoholics in. Why would non-alcoholics want to come? But that certainly happened because we have fun here and we have little things going for us that most people don't have. But I hope that we will always communicate alcoholic to alcoholic, and however we do it. I hope that we will continue to use the book with its perhaps stilted phrases but great healing powers. I hope we will always remain anonymous as necessary. I hope we will stay the way we are now, the most successful group to treat alcoholics in the history of mankind by far. 72 years ago, 72 years ago, I guess, there were 2 sober alcoholics of our type, and didn't know for years what would ever become of them, but they stayed sober and they got better. And I think the great truism of Alcoholics Anonymous came in one of the great truisms. I'm going to close now so we can get out of here, so you can go to the pub. In the late 1940s, Bill had written the 12 Traditions because AA was coming apart, and he realized it was coming apart, and he read about the Washingtonians, what made them come apart, and he sat down in 1945 and wrote the Traditions 10 years after AA started. And he issued them one by one in his new magazine called The Grapevine. And most people say, we don't want any rules. We don't want your damn rules. We're here for love. You hear me? And nobody. And so Bill and Dr. Bob, they had a hard time. Bill took his wife in a sidecar and went up and down the East Coast telling people, and that helped a little, but not much. But they realized they had to get to the whole membership. So they decided to have one big meeting where people from all the groups could come. And so in 1950, the first big meeting of alcoholics ever held in the world took place in Cleveland, Ohio. And they got there so they could tell them about their traditions. But among the things that happened that weekend, Bill Wilson gave a talk on Friday night, and it turned out the convention went so well they decided to have another one, and then another one, and these are the 5-year international conventions now. And Bill has talked to Friday night ever since until he died. They had 12 young guys, 6 young guys. I have the tapes of the convention. They're terrible quality, but they're great to listen to. They each took 2 traditions in the long form and explained why they were so necessary, why we have to have alcoholics, why we don't get involved in money, why we have to maintain our anonymity. And I don't know who they were, but you just hear their tails wagging. They were really excited. And one of the other things that happened at that convention was Dr. Bob spoke, which doesn't seem like much, except he was dying of cancer. And they said, you probably don't want to talk, Bob. He said, well, I've got to talk. I'm 15 years sober. I've got the second longest sobriety in the world. So on that day, his son on one side and a guy on the other side took this tall, gaunt, dying man to the podium in Cleveland. He said, my dear friends, I'm so glad to be here with you. I hope you go back and tell the boys and girls in your group that we are all continuing to work on this for the same thing. We're trying to do the same thing. And he get not much. He talked the usual crap. He says, as I look over this crowd today, I'm glad that some small thing I did 15 years ago helped bring this about. He says, I want to apologize for my health. I've been in bed most of the past few months. My health hasn't recovered the way I thought it would. And just, nothing memorable. But then he said, but I do want to call your attention to 2 or 3 things that I think we have to remember. And then he gave a short talk that is probably the most notable talk ever given in AA, because it's as true tonight in Bristol, England, as it was that day in Cleveland, Ohio. He always was a better translator. He always was a better 12 stepper than Bill Wilson ever was, because he was always helping people and talking to people, and Bill was kind of writing stuff. And he said, let me call your attention to 2 or 3 things. He said, first of all, let us remember to keep our programs simple. Let's not louse it all up with Freudian complexes, which may be of interest to the scientific mind, but has nothing to do with our work here. Our work here, when reduced to the last, consists of love and service. And we all know what love is, and we all know what service is. He said, and secondly, let us guard that erring member, the tongue, and try to use it with kindness and understanding. And there isn't a person in this room who doesn't know exactly what he's talking about. When things are going our way, we're on one, love is the answer, baby. But let somebody hurt our feelings before. The thing that always makes me laugh is this. All of us, in our way, fought against being an alcoholic. I'm not an alcoholic. Don't you understand that? We fought against it until we finally had to surrender and admit we were. And yet you're in AA a while, and the worst thing you can say about somebody, I don't even think that son of a bitch is an alcoholic. Curse of death. And finally he said, none of us would be here today we didn't get up during your talk. What are you getting up my talk for? What is she doing now? Goodbye. The pubs are open for 3 more hours. Anyway, he said, I don't know why people don't like me. I try to be nice. He said, none of us would be here today if someone hadn't taken the time to explain things to us, to give us a pat on the back when we needed it, to maybe take us to a few meetings. He said, let us never reach that stage of smug complacency where we don't have time to help our fellow man who suffers in the blackness of alcoholic despair. And he said thank you and sat down and was dead shortly thereafter. But that little talk is on the wall of the World Service Office in New York. As you get off the elevator, the whole talk is right there. Because that still is true tonight, what we're here about. We're not here to make changes. We're here to do things. We're here to provide love and service and try to use a pleasant tongue and try to share that with people who need help desperately. And when that happens, it makes for a good life. Thank you.